Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. When I was asked to speak about home care cooperatives, I have to admit that I kind of did one of these because we've had a wonderful, wonderful experience with cooperative care in Wisconsin, as Tracy shared with you earlier. But I'm also here to tell you we've had a spectacular failure with a home care cooperative in the state of Wisconsin, in the community of Appleton, Wisconsin. And there are some lessons to be learned, both from the wonderful story of cooperative care and the spectacular failure that we had with another one. And so I'll briefly share with you some of the observations that I've had, both of the success and the failure. And then I want to share a little introduction about what is a multi-stakeholder cooperative and why I feel that it can be a powerful complement to what is going on with worker cooperatives in this field. As Paul Hazen spoke about earlier, there are cooperatives, are businesses that are guided by a set of principles, and there's 7 principles. The third principle is member economic participation in your cooperative business. And one of the problems with this particular industry is that there are very low barriers to market entry. Starting a home care agency isn't capital intensive. However, if you're going to have a worker cooperative, you need to have member economic participation. People need to buy in. They need to have an equity investment in it in order to really psychologically be an owner of it. There's a big difference between being an employee of a long-term care agency and actually being a member owner like Tracy is, and the leadership that Tracy has taken on because she is a member owner of that cooperative. And as we know, home care providers, very low wages, we're talking $8 to $10 an hour. There isn't a whole lot of money left over to invest in a home care agency that you would co-own. Some of the ways that some of the existing home care worker cooperatives have gone about that is with a member, with a payroll deduction. Well, first of all, money is really tight. But second of all, that may not be enough of a psychological buy-in to being a member owner of that. Another thing to think about is that the model that home care currently works under is kind of a temporary help agency. As Robin Stone said, it's kind of getting the warm bodies out because there's this belief that there's a continuous supply of warm bodies out there. If we can just get them out there, and if they don't work out, oh well, we'll just get another set of warm bodies out there. That's the antithesis to the cooperative model, especially to the worker cooperative model. Like I said, that transition from being just an employee to being an actual owner. And so one of the things that we tend to see with worker cooperatives is that there's a lengthy pre-membership period. It's kind of like co-op dating. Am I a good fit for the co-op, and is the co-op a good fit for me? And during that period, because we're talking about ownership, and when you're an owner, you need skills. You need to be able to understand the basics of what is a co-op, your roles and responsibilities of being a member owner with a group of other caregivers, understanding the financials. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing with some of the worker cooperative work that's going on in lower income communities is that understanding financials not only of your cooperative, but understanding personal financials. Because if you can understand things on a personal level, hopefully you can transition that to understanding what's going on within your cooperative business. Participatory democracy. We don't have a lot of skills in democracy in the economy. And in fact, our school systems are very good at teaching us to be employees, but it's not necessarily very good at teaching us to be entrepreneurs and to be co-entrepreneurs with others in a cooperative setting. Problem solving and communication. One of the barriers that we ran into with the failed cooperative in Wisconsin is that transition to thinking as a business owner. Caregivers are the first ones. Caregivers have big hearts, and they're really good at intervention, at crisis intervention especially. oftentimes you'll hear, I've heard over and over with the caregivers I've worked with the two cooperatives, they're the first to admit, I'm not a businesswoman. I'm not used to this type of thinking. How do we help people through that? Getting beyond the crisis management of living from paycheck to paycheck, and I've seen it translated in running a business payroll to payroll. And I've actually seen some resistance to long-term planning and implementing a strategic plan because people personally are so caught up in that crisis management, in the personal crisis management, and the crisis management that they're good at with their clients. How do we help home care providers, if they truly are going to be member owners of a cooperative, transition into that? This is a cultural shift. Cooperatives in general, as Paul Hazen could share with us, cooperatives in general do better when they're in association with other cooperatives and can do some brainstorming and sharing of lessons learned. When you're in isolation, it becomes difficult, and you can feel quite isolated, and you're not benefiting from that association. And finally, another thing that in co-op development, we talk about something called the Madison Principles for co-op development. And one of those principles is that cooperatives take a lot of energy, a lot of resources, a lot of time and energy to form. And if there isn't a substantial difference in people's wages or their benefits, their work environment, or how they view themselves and how they are viewed within the community, don't bother. Don't bother. Cooperatives need to make a substantial difference in people's lives, or else it's not worth pursuing. So given what I've shared with you, and I've been reluctant to share with you the spectacular failure that consumed a lot of my energies for about a 4-year period, I would suggest to you that we take a look at the multi-stakeholder model. And I'll just give a brief definition of what is a multi-stakeholder cooperative. It's a co-op with 2 or more membership classes. And those can be workers, such as the case that we've shared here today of caregivers being owner members of their cooperative. It can also be users, be it the clients or the consumers themselves, be it their family members, what have you. And then the third group that you could pool in to be co-owners of this would be supporters. And that can be hospitals and clinics, like what we're going to talk about. It could be advocacy groups. It could be church groups, what have you. People that have an active interest in what's going on in long-term care at the local level. And this is different than just being an advisory group or kind of an ad hoc group. The multi-stakeholder model is relatively little used here in the United States. It was pioneered in Italy. They were pioneering it back in the 80s. Law was changed in 1991, and it's a very popular method for providing social services through different stakeholders coming together. Now in Quebec, in Canada, the law was changed back in 1996, where social services, that is the predominant way that social services are being delivered, along with proximity services, services in rural areas that make a community vibrant, that are being owned and operated on what they call up there the solidarity model. Here we tend to call it the multi-stakeholder model. And here in the US, there's been a kind of a theoretical questioning about whether or not this can happen, because theoretically the idea is that, for instance, with home care, that the care providers would want the highest wages possible for what they're providing, and that the consumers or the clients would want to pay the lowest possible wages for that. And how can you have those two very different perspectives be in the same organization? It's believed that if you just leave the market, that the market will figure it out for you. Well, markets don't always work so well, especially when there's relationship goods where you need long-term relationships to make services work, such as long-term care. So the idea has been, why not bring those multiple perspectives together in the same cooperative, people coming together on the same board, in the same committees, around the same table, and talking about these things and learning from each other, and perhaps seeing that, hey, we're not that different. We really have a common goal. Let's work towards that. So I would argue that perhaps this is something that could be explored. In Quebec, they have over 100 of these since 1996. It might be something to take a look at up there. There is a wonderful guide that was just written by a colleague named Margaret Lund. She's associated with the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University in Ohio. And there's some information, you can get this as a free download. There's some information in your packet about this. And it gives more specific information about, what exactly is this multi-stakeholder model perspective. I've had the opportunity to help form 3 multi-stakeholder cooperatives in Wisconsin. And I'll just briefly share with you as a parallel example of one of those co-ops that might give you some ideas. The Producers and Buyers Cooperative is a group that formed about 3 years ago now up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in the northwest part of the state, about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from the Twin Cities. And what happened was that a mid-sized hospital called Sacred Heart Hospital wanted to start sourcing food locally. For a number of reasons. They know it's the right thing to do, but also from a risk management perspective. If there's an H1N1 epidemic or an oil embargo and the Cisco truck can't show up at the back door, they still have 200 patients to feed along with staff. So they wanted to start forming relationships with local farmers to try to source some of this. And what they found was that when they went to local farmers, no one local farmer could meet all the needs of a mid-sized hospital. And so with the help of a local resource conservation and development group, River Country RC&D, that had a lot of clout with the farming community, they brought together various farmers with the hospital and started talking for about, it was about 15 months' time, how would this work? And so instead of forming just a buying co-op of hospitals or just a farmer's co-op to market, they had entered into relationship with one another. And so they formed a multi-stakeholder cooperative where you have the producers, the buyers, local processors, and some local transport people, all co-owning this, working together. And they wanted to do this because it's just not a casual customer-supplier relationship. There's a lot of learning that needs to go on. The hospital's learning about the seasonality of food, the farmer's learning about the quantity of food that's needed and that you can't make a chicken too big because it doesn't fit under the container that goes up to the hospital rooms. A lot of those types of relationships. And it's been a very exciting opportunity to see various people coming together and honestly sharing and learning from one another. And there's a lot of skin in the game in it as well. And I think that this might be an opportunity to explore here that could we look at workers continuing to have a vital role in cooperatives, but then maybe bringing in some community stakeholders, along with perhaps family members, to make this an even stronger model.